On this edition of Independent Sources, unhealthy advertising, why food and beverage companies are directly targeting vulnerable populations in poor and minority communities with their ads for their products. And Reading Without Walls, the effort to create more diversity in mainstream books and comics, and why there's still some resistance.
Independent Sources, your window to the city's ethnic and immigrant communities. Your host this week, Zyphus Lebrun.
A recent study published in the Journal of Urban Health suggests that MTA-regulated ads with unhealthy foods and beverages are deliberately targeting vulnerable communities in the Bronx. The study was co-authored by researchers from the Albert Einstein College of Medicine and Lehman College in the Bronx and New York University in Manhattan. It correlated subway ridership information with census data and dietary intake statistics from a city health department survey. Among some of the findings were that less healthful ads, specifically ads in Spanish directed at youth, were directly correlated with poverty and lower high school graduation rates. This at a time when 1 in 5 kindergarten students and more than half of the city's population is overweight. I spoke with two of the authors of the study, Dr. Sean Lucan and Omer Sanan, about their findings. Dr. Sean Lucan, Omer Sanan, thank you very much for being in studio today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
All right. So let's just get started with this. Recent study done over the last few years. Why was this study done? Why did you guys choose to do this study?
So I'm a family doctor at Montefiore Medical Center, and I take care of patients, children through adult. Most of my patients are overweight and suffer from a variety of diet-related chronic diseases, and I realize they have tremendous obstacles to eating better. And so most of the research that I do at Einstein College of Medicine is to look at the food environment, look at the sources of food in the landscape that people have access to and how that may influence their eating behaviors. What I found is that the food environment is beyond just the food sources that are out there, though. It also is the messages to eat food and what advertisers are telling people that they should consume. And so I wanted to really get a sense of what those messages were, who they were focused on and what they were targeting, and what types of advertising people were exposed to in their daily lives. I thought the subway system or the transit system might be a good place to start and kind of an approachable first step.
Mm-hmm. Now, the research was focused in the Bronx specifically. Any reason for that?
Well, a couple of reasons. One, I'm located in the Bronx, so conveniently and logistically it made sense. But also, my patients are in the Bronx and the patients of Montefiore Health System. So it was, it was a personal quest as much as it was a research quest. I wanted to know what my patients were exposed to and what kind of messages they were getting, and how that may influence their dietary decisions and overall health.
And now, one of the findings was that the advertisements were found in areas where the populations were either minority populations, large minority populations, and in some cases, when ads were in Spanish in particular, they were targeted at communities where there was not a very high level of education. Do you want to, extrapolate a little bit more on that for the audience, please?
I should say that ads were everywhere. Right? There was tons of advertising, and Omar can speak a little to that in terms of the ads and what was available in the different stations, and particularly some of the stations that had just a disproportionate number of ads.
Right. So yeah, Omar.
Right, and so my colleague and I, we rode all 7 lines in the Bronx, and we stopped at 68 different stations. And so we assessed the ads anywhere from the intra-city exits and also on the platforms of the stations. We noted the brands and companies being featured, and also the sizes as well.
Right.
And so some of the stations featured no ads, but more surprisingly, a lot of stations, including like the one at Yankee Stadium, overwhelmingly featured ads for unhealthy foods.
Right.
That was something surprising for us.
Right. Now, who were the biggest culprits, as regards to these advertisements?
So going off of like Yankee Stadium, for example, that had over 200 ads in total, but for the unhealthy food ads, it had 20 unhealthy food ads. The biggest culprit in that station was Red Bull, for example. Off the top of my head, a lot of alcohol companies appeared as well, such as Coors Light. A lot of hard alcohol, such as like Bulldog vodka and things like that, also appeared. as well.
And I should say that Yankee Stadium is a station where you would expect a lot of advertising, right? So there's a lot of foot traffic there. There's a high potential viewership. You wouldn't be surprised to find a lot of advertising there, and proportionately a lot of unhealthy food advertising. But what was striking was that when we looked across the system, excluding Yankee Stadium, was that the unhealthy food and beverage advertising didn't correlate with ridership, right? So it wasn't that these messages or these ads were directed to the widest possible audiences. They were directed to specific audiences.
Right.
So marketers weren't looking for viewers in general. They were looking for specific viewers. And those viewers tended to be vulnerable, high-risk populations.
Did you guys find that there was a correlation between the ads and the areas where those numbers of, for instance, hypertension, diabetes, and so forth were greatest? Correct.
So Omar and some other students that summer did, a Herculean feat going into the Bronx and looking at, they rode all 7 lines. They stopped at all 68 stations. They looked at every ad there, which was over 1,500.
Wow. Actually, when we were going from station to station, our results weren't immediately clear. And so it was when we took our entire data set and actually linked it to other data sources that a clear picture started to emerge. And so the situation is definitely subtle, but our data shows that targeting is actually going on.
Yeah, and just to clarify that, so Omar and the other students went out and collected all this data from all the stations, and then I linked that data to data on ridership from the MTA, to data on demographics from the Census Bureau, and data on health parameters from the New York City Department of Health. And so looking at that, we could make correlations and say, where were these ads and how did they tie to different characteristics of the communities in which the stations were located. And so it was abundantly clear that the ads for less healthy foods and beverages were found in higher risk, more vulnerable communities. So communities with lower educational attainment, higher rates of poverty, more minority representation, specifically higher percentages of Black and Hispanic residents, and more children. And then we also saw correlations with health statistics. So these unhealthy foods were being marketed in communities that were suffering disproportionately from low fruit and vegetable intake, high sugar sweetened beverage consumption, high rates of diabetes, high cholesterol, and hypertension.
Right. And now I know that there has to be, in certain instances, these ad companies, they choose specific areas where they want these ads to go. And in some cases, it might be more expensive to target certain areas. I mean, did you guys find that in your research as well, that these ads were being placed in these at probably a higher cost to these companies?
Well, so speaking strictly as a scientist, right, we found these correlations, and to explain the correlation, one explanation is that there's targeting among the unhealthy foods. The other explanation could be that there's targeting of all the other products out there, the movies, the entertainment, the cell phone companies, the cable companies, everyone else that was in the subway station. It's conceivable, you could make an argument that all those other companies were just gearing their ads to healthy, white, wealthy adults, and that the only ad space left was that for, for the unhealthy advertisers to advertise in, were these ads in these vulnerable communities. That seems like a highly unlikely scenario, and so makes us think that there is targeting at play. Now, to the point about cost, yes, it costs more to place ads in specific stations. So per conversation with the MTA, for random distribution across the system, it costs a set amount. If you want to select the stations where you want to put the ads, though, it costs not quite twice as much, but substantially more. So, if there is targeting going on, as our data strongly suggests there is, the companies are paying a premium for it. And then the question is why? It seemed obvious to me that you don't pay that premium unless you're making an investment where you're going to get a return. So in targeting specific groups as opposed to the widest possible audiences, that has to relate to greater profit. And it means, I think taking advantage of vulnerable communities.
Now, Omar, in the process of, collecting this information and so forth, did you ever feel that perhaps in just talking to the everyman that he or she got a sense of what was going on, like being aware of, if you will, the strings of the puppeteer or the walls of the matrix, if you will?
And I think, that's actually part of the problem, not being aware of what exactly advertising, that influence that it has on the person. And, again, speaking to my experience going from station to station, a lot of the people seemed oblivious as to, why we were going and, recording all the different ads. And some people would come up to us and ask us why we were doing it. And, we would explain to them, what our end goal was. And for them, it didn't really seem to connect right away. So I think awareness is part of the problem as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that, while the data clearly shows targeting, and that seemed pretty unambiguous no matter how we ran the numbers, and we ran it several ways just to make sure that we were coming to the right conclusion, that finding isn't so obvious when you're riding in the stations themselves, right? I mean, that becomes obvious when you look at the whole system as a total and link it with these other data sets. But I think this is really subtle and insidious. So it's easy for companies to get away with this kind of behavior because it's so hard to detect. Mm-hmm. But when you actually look at the totality of the data, it's pretty inescapable, the conclusions.
What do you hope will come out of this research?
I think one thing is just greater awareness. So raising awareness in communities, particularly communities that seem to be targeted, to allow them, give them the information they need to kind of vote with their wallets, to say, we do not accept this targeting. We do not accept this taking advantage of, kind of populations that need this treatment the least. And for other communities to say, let's hold companies socially accountable. I'm not part of any of these vulnerable communities to which these advertisers are targeting, but, I might choose with my own dollars to say, I'm not going to support this type of behavior. I'm going to hold these companies accountable and, say that this will not stand. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, that's just on the information side, the public awareness side, and, kind of the consumer action side. But I think government has a role to play in this too. And certainly can. So there's already existing regulation out there restricting tobacco products, right? So tobacco can't be advertised in the transit system. And there's movement afoot to try to get a ban on alcohol advertising in the subway system and the broader transit system. So I think that might be a first step in sort of addressing at least one aspect of unhealthy beverages, and then deciding, where that goes or how that, may expand to cover a broader range of products remains to be seen. But I think that's a step in the direction of some action that at least government could play in this.
All right. Well, Dr. Sean Lukin and Omar, thank you very, very much for being in studio. This was a very enlightening conversation.
Thanks for having us.
Still to come on the show, why there's more hatred in America. Welcome back. Lawmakers around the country are responding to a sharp jump in hate crimes by trying to strengthen policies and laws that will carry stiffer penalties for those found guilty of such acts. The FBI reports that there's been a 7% increase in such crimes between 2014 and 2015. Those figures are marked by sharp spikes in crimes against Jews and Muslims. I spoke with Alicia Brooks of the Southern Poverty Law Center via Skype. The SPLC is a non-profit civil rights organization that compiles such data. We talked about the statistics and what's behind the numbers. Alicia Brooks, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So, Alicia, Southern Poverty Law Center, you guys released statistics saying that hate crimes essentially are on the rise in this country. Let's talk a little bit about that. Can you tell me by how much you guys are seeing an increase in these hate crimes?
Well, the Southern Poverty Law Center, since the early 2000s, have done an annual accounting of active hate and extremist groups in the United States. So we do this count every year. What was a little different with last year's count, which was for 2016, it was an increase of about 25 hate groups, additional hate groups. But what we've noted and are most troubled by is the increase in hate and bias incidents that happened in the immediate aftermath of the presidential election.
Right. Now, I know that in past years, there was an association, there was a correlation a bit between those spikes with Democratic presidencies rather than Republican. Is there any sort of analysis as to why that sort of shift?
Well, we think that the current increase in hate groups and hate group activity is definitely connected to the presidential campaign. Now, I think everyone will agree that it was probably the most ugly campaign in recent history. It was full of hateful, dehumanizing rhetoric, beginning with the dehumanization of immigrants, and in particular Mexicans, went on to target and vilify Muslims. And so after the election, we're not at all surprised to see an increase in hate or bias incidents that were targeting those particular populations. Mm-hmm. What we weren't, we were prepared for, but it's alarming nonetheless, is that we've noted that white nationalists and white supremacists have been emboldened by the election of Mr. Trump, and this phenomena of hate and bias incidents that are just happening regularly in places like New York, pretty alarming.
I see. One of the things, too, coming out of all of this is this concern as regards to the numbers and how the numbers between statistics found by the FBI and some of the statistics that you guys have found, that they don't actually match up. What's kind of behind that, do you think?
Well, so I think that's very interesting because the numbers are all wrong, right? FBI, Department of Justice numbers relative to hate crimes are self-reported by police agencies, or police agencies self-report hate crimes or hate incidents to the FBI. So because they're self-reporting, not everyone does it with integrity. An example I like to use: a couple of years ago, Mississippi, the state of Mississippi, showed no hate crimes for an entire year, and that's just pretty hard to believe. So what we're doing, the Southern Poverty Law Center begun a project with ProPublica, and we hope to really improve the data. Data collection around hate crimes has always been notoriously low.
Mm-hmm. And how do you hope to do that? Because that was actually my next question as regards to improving the collection of such information.
Well, the Southern Poverty Law Center opened a web portal called #ReportHate right after the election. It really opened on November 9, and it's still open. And what we're doing is gathering information, inviting people to report either being victimized by hate crime or witnessing a hate crime. And what we'll do with that data is kind of drill down to find out what's really happening. There are some news agencies, journalists who are also doing similar work. Some schools of journalism are doing similar work. So we hope to kind of work with all of the agencies across the country who are collecting hate crime data. Human Relations Commissions across the country have been doing it. Everyone's been doing it, but we need to pull that data together and do some good analysis of it and get a better picture of what's happening around hate crimes in the country.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that there's been enough of a response at the governmental level? Because I know in March there was a letter sent to the AG Sessions specifically with regards to addressing these issues. Has there been enough of a response from the governmental level?
Not at all, not at all. And we can see it in that horrific killing, the sword killer in New York, the man who took a bus from Maryland to New York to kill black men. And we're still waiting on the administration to strongly condemn that and to identify it as a case of domestic terrorism. So no, we are certainly calling on the Attorney General and the Trump administration to strongly condemn these hate crimes.
Is there any concern as regards to retaliation for such hate crimes amongst the groups that are targeted?
No. That's not how it typically works. I mean, hate crimes are very traumatic experiences for people, and I really want to stress this, that they're anxiety producing. They are acts of terrorism that are meant to sow fear in the group, in an entire group. Someone is attacked because of bias based on their identity, and it has the effect of creating anxiety for anyone else who shares those characteristics. And so it's not often that people can move beyond that anxiety and develop a plan to retaliate. It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen in that way at all. People, the anxiety just continues to increase. What we have to do, people who are not targeted, need to stand up strongly against these acts. That is the only way to end this and to not allow this behavior to become normalized in any way. And we have to fight this on a number of different fronts simultaneously. And anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim, anti-Semitic.
Well, Alicia, thank you very much for being with us today, and best of luck with your endeavors.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. When we come back, challenging Americans to read more stories about people who don't look like them, and why that's still proving to be difficult. Finally from us, there's an effort afoot to get Americans to read more books featuring characters of color or written by authors of color. The Reading Without Walls Challenge was issued by Jean Yang, the National Ambassador for Young People's Literature, and will run throughout the month of April. I spoke with Mark Siegel, the founder and editorial director at First Second Books, the graphic novel division of Macmillan Books, and writer Jorge Aguirre, the author of Dragons Beware and the Chronicles of Claudette, about the challenge facing the industry. Before we start the conversation, I'd like to take in this clip from Jean Yang, who is the National Ambassador for Young People's Literature, who's launched the Reading Without Walls program.
With this new program, I am challenging readers of all ages to expand their reading horizons by picking up different kinds of books and reading about something new. The Reading Without Walls program challenges readers to do one of the following. Number one, read a book about a character that doesn't look like you or live like you. Or number two, read a book about a topic that you might not know anything about. Or number three, read a book in a format that you don't normally read for fun. This can be a chapter book, a graphic novel, a book of poems, or even an audiobook.
So, Mark, let's talk a little bit about why is such a challenge necessary?
Well, we live, as Jean Yang so eloquently puts it, we live inside our walls, in many cases self-made walls or inherited walls, and we tend to become familiar with certain things and completely blind to other things. And one of the great escapes from that limitation is literature in every kind, you know, and great movies, great music, all of it opens up our world beyond these walls.
Now, you know, Jorge, this issue of diversity, it's kind of like a buzzword now, you know, in mainstream and so forth. You as a creator, is that something that's in the forefront of your mind when you're starting to create, you know, a comic and so forth, a graphic novel, if you will?
I would say the kind of stories I like to tell are the ones that feel familiar to me. And I think maybe because I grew up as, I'm a Latino, I'm also from the Midwest, I think that sort of informs how I approach stories. So diversity is at the forefront along with other things that I'm also concerned with when I'm trying to tell a story. In our graphic novels, my partner is a Puerto Rican in Ohio and I'm a Colombian American in New Jersey, but our story takes place in a French village. But we try to, you know, infuse the village with a diverse set of characters that don't look or act like typical archetypal type of characters.
Now, for you too, now, Mark, I mean, with what you do you now look for stories that feature such characters and look for creators who are, you know, from different parts of the world as well, or at least whose origins take them from different parts of the world?
In a way, I think it's a mindset that you develop and you grow into, and I do to a certain point, but I also respond to what really grabs me, and we do, for Second, you know, looks very diverse. We publish people of all different backgrounds from all different parts of the world. We have Muslims and Buddhists and Jews and Christians and, you know, others I don't know about, but and so it looks diverse, but that was not actually the point in the first place. It really was going after quality, going after great voices, great talents, and it looks like our world looks. You know, it's like this incredible patchwork assortment of different human experiences. You know, so I think you can be open to that or not open to that. And in some cases, we don't see our own limitations, and so life throws challenges at us, you know, and I think if you, like being in New York City, it's like the tumbler, you know, you're going to mix with humanity. And whatever your own little narrowness that you grew up with, possibly, is going to be challenged, you know.
Now, Jorge, do you feel challenged to kind of bring aspects of your culture within the context of your work?
I do. I mean, I do try to bring, you know, I do kids' TV animation, and I do try to imbue that as well. And also, you know, I am hoping to write something a little bit more from my Colombian American Midwestern perspective, which I don't think is a tale that gets told a lot. You know, there's not a lot of us.
Right.
So I think it'd be fun. So I am always exploring that. It's not out there yet, but I'm hoping to.
Okay. Underlying all this conversation that we're having is this notion of comic books, graphic novels becoming a more legitimate sort of medium in the mainstream.
Yes.
And one of the leaders in comics, Marvel Comics, Marvel's vice president of sales, David Gabriel, recently said that he was told by comic book retailers that they were not looking for diversity, that their characters they were looking for people of color and so forth. It caused a bit of a firestorm, you know, within the nerd culture, if you will, as regards to, you know, those statements that he has made.
Yeah.
Is it really no diversity, or is it a matter of just bad writing, you know, in that sort of circumstance?
Right. Well, I think, to me, that is actually the more important question, is the one you just asked, which is the quality of the stuff, you know. And just like you can make an effort to go, like there have been some very misguided efforts towards diversity, you know, where there's this kind of politically correct thing of like, let's make sure that, you know, the sitcom has the token gay character and the token black and the token, you know, it's like, no, that's not real diversity. That's just kind of pandering, you know, and without taking too much of a risk. But if you're talking about great storytelling, that kind of moves the whole conversation beyond, you know, and because it also, it speaks to, you know, is it getting to the truth of a character? Is it getting emotionally resonant, you know, in a way that reflects the human race, that reflects the human experience as it is today? And when you start moving into that conversation, it is beyond bias. It's above that. You know, it doesn't live down in the petty squabbles that divide us as people.
And Jorge, just, you know, we're running out of time before we go. Do you feel that kind of being out there as a creator of color and so forth, that you feel like your work is being searched out more now? You know, do you think that there are more opportunities kind of being opened up for you in light of these conversations about diversity, diverse authors and creators writing stories about diverse characters?
You know, I hope so. I don't know, but I would hope that would be the case. But also, you know, to me, I think it's also about being able to have a spot where I can tell my stories. So we were talking a little bit before about how, you know, to Mark's credit, I mean, he has opened up this library at First Second Books to a really diverse group of creators. I mean, there's Gene, there's Raphael and I think I don't have enough time to name them all. Today I was thinking about Color of Earth in the Korean story trilogy, and I think to the credit of the imprint and to Mark and the group there for a second, I mean, they really put their money where their mouth is. I mean, they want diverse creators, and they're bringing lots of them in.
All right. Well, Jorge and Mark, thank you very much for being in studio. There is so much more that I, as a comic book nerd, would like to talk about, but we're out of time.
We'll do a director's cut.
Absolutely. We'll do a director's cut. Thank you, gentlemen, both for being in studio.
Right. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
That's our show this week. Thanks for staying tuned. Till next time, be independent-minded.